All right, we're at 4 o'clock, so I'm going to kick off. Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to today's webinar on value-driven learning. My name is Ella Richardson, and I'll be leading today's webinar alongside my esteemed colleague, Jeff Bloom. By way of introduction, I'm the Learning Design Director at Leo. I have a background in psychology. I've been at Leo for 8 years, and I'm supporting a very broad team of learning specialists, including consultants and very talented learning designers. Together, we look at the use of innovative learning strategies for measured and demonstrable change. So delighted to be here with you today. Jeff, hand over to you to introduce yourself.
Hi, Jeff Bloom. I'm a principal consultant with Leo. I've been with Leo about 12 years, I think. I've been in learning and development. I normally put in my bio for about 30 years, but I think unfortunately it's heading closer to 40 years now. But I've always worked with lots of different clients on lots of different projects, and you know, we're always trying to deliver value with the learning that we create. But at this particular session, we want to look at value from a number of different perspectives. But anyway, that's me.
Great.
Yeah, Audrey, it's obviously baking in Montego Bay, so that's obviously making me even more jealous. If anybody else wants to drop into the questions or the chat, you know where they are, and make the rest of us jealous, please do so.
Thanks, Jeff. If you want to move on the slides, first I'm just going to explain a little bit about the Leo context in case anyone's not aware. So Leo is part of the Learning Technologies Group, which is a growing group of like-minded organisations, and we all work in service of change, growth and talent development in organisations across the globe. And this means that we're working alongside or in tandem with the best in very different sometimes, but very complementary fields. So you can see here there's a growing mix. I won't touch on everyone, but there's a mixture of products in the group, such as leading authoring tools like Gomo, LXP and other platforms, so Instilled and PeopleFluence, talent management, and more. We have data experts in Watershed and technical integration experts in Rustici. We've also got businesses such as Uclea, who are governance, risk and compliance experts, and Preloaded, who specialise in games with purpose and immersive technologies. What this means and why I tell you this is that Leo, while we're tech agnostic, we can bring the best experts to solve new organisational problems as they're evolving, or to develop completely novel approaches to more long-standing organisational challenges. And this really is the value for Leo of being part of the Learning Technologies Group for the organisations that we work with. And moving on, so Leo, where Jeff and I work, we look at learning in all its forms, but we're particularly in the business of effective digitally enabled learning, which means that we can deliver effectively at distance. And you might sometimes, if you know us well, you might hear us talk about our mission, which is to lead your learning revolution. And that means that we understand that the organisations that we work with are all in different places, and we provide the support to transform those organisations and often their learning cultures using digital tools. One of the benefits of doing what we do in driving, all of these things, the content, technology, the delivery of learning and the strategy for some of the world's largest companies and their teams is really that we can distill what we learn and bring that to you. We've individually got lots of experience. Jeff's got tons of experience, and so we want to bring that conversation to you today. So let's get cracking. So we're going to look at a few things. Firstly, why we think it's important to really talk about value specifically right now, how to determine what that means, what it really means, and how to hone and extract the most value, specifically how to reduce waste, how to use our budgets effectively and invest really carefully, and finally, kind of most importantly for me, but how do we know whether we're actually getting value, and how do we anticipate future needs? We're going to start with a poll, and Jeff mentioned, I'm going to hand over to him. So, oh no, I've jumped ahead.
You jumped slightly ahead, but I mean, you said, I think, this is a particularly interesting time for looking at things like value. So, as a result of the coronavirus, a lot of things are changing. Some of our clients are a lot busier than usual. Some of our clients are a lot quieter than usual, and that's obviously having an effect on their businesses or their operations. If you're in healthcare, you may be particularly busy at the moment. If you're in distribution, you might be particularly busy at the moment. But if you're in hospitality or if you're in entertainment, things might be a bit quieter. But anyway, Fosway did a survey that said that 94% of L&D professionals report having had to change their L&D strategy. Only 5% think their learning strategy will go back to what it was before the pandemic. In the UK, and obviously this is going to vary a lot around the world, the economy shrank by 20.4% in April. There's discussion about whether that is a sort of shrinkage that will come back as a V or come back as a W, but definitely businesses are going through lots of change. And of course, we'd expect that either potentially people might have more budgets, or they probably equally or more likely might have a lot of pressure and reduced budgets. And at the same time, there is an awful lot of demand for learning. So I think it's a great time to focus in on value. We're changing the way we do things sometimes, and sometimes we're doing that very, very quickly. So as Ella said, we want to ask your opinion on this. I always hesitate when we're introduced as experts, because I think one of the lovely things about the business that we work in is that as well as delivering learning, we learn so much about our clients' organizations and the way that they approach learning. And that's really the joy of the job, actually, is working with so many different people we can learn so much from. So this is where the QR code comes in. If you haven't got a QR code reader, then the URL is in the chat as well. And we can anticipate some of the pressures people are facing, but we'd actually quite like to sort of get your view on what are the pressures you're facing at the moment, and how, of course, how value might be important in that. It's always important. It might become even more important. So I did this before, actually. I was so busy concentrating on clicking in the right place that I click on to the next slide. So at the bottom right of this screen, some of you worked out how to do this already, which is fantastic. You'll see there's a little plus sign. If you click on that, it will allow you to put up some of your challenges. So and I guess uncertainty, I've just already alluded to that. Redesigning without guidance, that's a really interesting one. Hopefully we can sort of give you some useful stuff as part of this session. No surprise that there's reduced budgets. Yeah, lots of people saying, or a few people saying there's reduced budgets. No travel, of course. So I'll just give people a chance to put a little bit more stuff up. What we'll do is, if there's some particularly interesting things that come up as part of this, as part of publishing this recording, we'll also send out any information that's particularly useful as well.
Yeah. Uncertainty is a really interesting one. Perhaps something I hadn't expected to see, but I think that's part of the challenge now, is that things are changing. We're constantly having to reevaluate at the moment, which is proving quite challenging.
Excellent. So not excellent that we're subject to so much change. Not excellent that we're coming under these pressure. But I'm hoping that what we're going to cover today is going to be relevant to sort of meeting and supporting you with ideas for some of these challenges. So we might come back to this in a minute, but I think you can see what sort of things people are coming up with.
Definitely seeing themes in producing more with less, and having less budget. And also I'm seeing a few things here which is quite relevant to some of the things that we're going to touch on in terms of understanding stakeholder needs and getting buy-in from leadership and others.
I mean, one of the things that we've seen sort of in the short term is that people have sort of had to carry on doing things in a different way. and that obviously is very expedient, but it may be an emergency reaction. So, I think it's a good time to be looking back at value. So good. It looks well. Good. Hopefully this is relevant. Not good that it needs to be. So I'll just get rid of my toolbar. Let's move on then. Sorry, Ella, did you want to?
I was just going to say, I was just gonna move us on and kick us off while you were finding the slide. But really, like, the first thing we were going to look at was what is value in learning, and I think the main principle that we're talking about in generating value is to establish to what extent does something actually meet the needs and objectives that we've set out. We commonly think of value as what we're willing to pay, and we often see that reflected in in a focus on cost. But the reality is that the expected value that we're going to yield from something isn't something that's always necessarily thought through early on, or in fact it can be quite difficult to specify. So we wanted to focus here and just think through, it's important to think really, are there any other needs? Because we quite simply can't actually really start to talk about value until we've determined what it is that can meet those needs. And I think it kind of goes without saying. But value is the thing that we want, and it's increased by removing waste. We increase that value by being relevant and by delivering efficiently and effectively, whatever that means in the context that we're looking at. Go on, Jeff.
Yeah, and I think that value means different things to different people. So some of the stuff that we're going to sort of just touch on early on, I think, is just kind of to get some common ground. So we know that sponsors might be looking for different things from value than maybe the learner. And the training team may be looking for things that make them look good or make their lives easier or whatever, but obviously ultimately are really about making sure they're delivering great content, great experiences, making a difference. So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes looking at sort of some of the things that different people are looking for. And the reason we're doing this now, because some of these things you'll know well, is that when things change, sometimes things are in a bit of a rush, and it can be easy to forget what the value requirements of things are. And of course they can change a lot between different programs. So the value that people are looking for from an induction program, learning program, might be very different from the value they're looking for from for example, a sales training program. So we just very quickly have a look at the sort of different things that people typically want. And we also introduce on these slides something that is often very important when people talk about value, and that's the idea of return on investment. So do you want to just sort of talk to a couple of these points, Ella, and we can take this in turns if you like?
Yeah, so I think it's important to recognise that, well, I think we all recognise that we often have different stakeholders, and we often we focus on their needs at different times. Now, your organisation's stakeholders, the key sponsors, are obviously important because they hold the organisation's requirements front and centre, but they can also typically be the most liable to change if we don't sit down and really work together and keep them involved all the way through. So typically, you can see highlighted here the things that lend the most to ROI are seeing a demonstrated impact. They want to know that it's going to deliver and it will work, and we'll see an evidence change on the other side of an intervention.
Obviously, we're passionate about learning, and so one of probably the stakeholder that matters most to us is the learner. That's where people can make a difference to the organisation, and the learners will have a whole range of different needs, and their needs may change as they go through their careers and at different stages of learning programs. But I guess overall, any learning they undertake, they want it to be worth their time, they want it to be efficient, they will want to acquire new skills and knowledge and learn something, and they'll normally want to apply that, and they want it to improve their performance or improve the performance of the business. So learners will have more personal needs perhaps than sponsors. And when we use the term sponsor, by the way, this may be somebody that provides money, but of course it may be somebody that just sort of decides on priorities, or maybe the person that allocates the time for things to be carried out.
I think it's worth saying here, you know, these are examples from our experience, but it's important, and what we're suggesting is that you think about these for you and your context and your organisation. You know, being explicit about obtaining this input is the thing that will help to generate value. For learners, you know, these are typically the things that we think that they value and that they want. Ultimately, you know, learners are looking actively in service of something else. You know, they want to develop themselves, and it's vital that we tap into whatever it is that they want, and also what they might not know that they need, so that we can really make sure that we're addressing that.
And in specific sectors, of course, there'll be other requirements as well. So people might have a requirement to be licensed to work, or they want to make sure that they're working in a safe way. So, you know, these are quite general requirements, but there are lots of things. And again, it's about looking at the kind of things that they want. You know, we work within the, you know, we're normally part of the training team, taking learning into organizations or creating learning for our own organization. And I guess a lot of people on this call will probably be in similar roles. But the training team will also want some specific things that are related to the other stakeholders.
Yeah, that's right. And typically, I think, you know, the training team and also other teams like technical teams, you know, we've really got to think not just about the end user or the people who are asking for something, but also the environment that something's going into and who's supporting or facilitating that. So typically, you know, there's other stakeholders that we see who maybe aren't involved early on, or who could be, you know, we need to establish what value and we can bring to them, whether that's facilitators of courses or HR or legal. Some of the things that we often come up against are things like security and accessibility of learning. And actually, you know, it's so important to engage with the needs of these stakeholders up front, so that we can really deliver value for all parties.
Yeah, the technical team might be literally the technical team, the people that sort of provide the technology, or they might be teams like the legal team or the HR team, the teams that sort of set the conditions really within which learning can take place.
Yeah.
But they will often be interested in things that learning supports and that needs to comply with.
Yeah, and I'm mindful that, you know, the reason that we're talking about this now, you know, we've called this shifting focus to the value-based learning, because we're having to rapidly reevaluate what we're doing and how organizations are working. And so it's I think it's worth also checking in more frequently, or thinking about how we're checking in with stakeholders, so that we can be sure that we are really focused on the value that we want to bring.
Yeah, and Sharon, I just noticed actually in the questions, Sharon just made a good point about expertise, that we're offering up some of our thoughts and ideas here. Obviously, in a world which is constantly changing and that no one knows, it's very hard to be an expert. So, you know, I think that this is sharing thoughts and ideas, whether they land or not. And you know, if you've got ideas that you're prepared to share in the chat, then it can kind of help all of us navigate these slightly strange times. So value, as Ella said, is you know, the first part of value really is to sort of make sure that you're being relevant and you're delivering to your customers, you know, whether they're the different, you know, whatever different type of a stakeholder they are. So you can be delivering the right thing. So that's really, really important, and that can vary project by project. And I guess that's self-evident, really. Not always what happens, but it's certainly what happens when there's a good focus. But it doesn't. Doing the right thing or meeting the needs of the stakeholders can be done in ways that are cheap, expensive, efficient, inefficient, you know, a good user experience, a difficult user experience, whatever. So one of the perspectives we thought would be, you know, might be quite useful here is to look at where waste occurs in learning. And there's two sides to this really. There's the kind of waste in the creation of learning. So that could be creating content that people don't really need. But in particular, we think it's quite interesting to look at what waste means from the point of view of a learner. So there's a few ideas here, and it's worth pointing out, I think, that we've kind of said that things on the left of the picture here can be wasteful, and things on the right of the picture here can be valuable. But actually, it's really important here to think about context. So if you work in an environment where you are preventing accidents, then understanding how to deal with difficult situations or accidents or whatever, just in case, can be really important, and really it might technically be wasteful if it's not used, but actually it's still very necessary. So just take these ideas in context. But I don't know whether you'd like to talk through a couple of these, Ella.
Yeah, it's a really good point. So I think what Jeff's saying is we're not absolutist about this, but in general, we know that things like active engagement, immersing people in experiences, enabling people to learn from experience, providing genuine dilemma-based challenges that make people think, all of these kinds of things are founded in solid evidence-based design. And that's not to say that there aren't times in which that they won't be needed, but actually where we see opportunities to generate more value is by personalizing experiences and giving people really challenging experiences that enable them to grow and learn and develop.
Just to jump in on that one, sorry to interrupt you, Ella, just that because obviously we're talking about value and waste here. So if, for example, we deliver a collective experience where the individual is only getting 30% of what's delivered from it, either because they already know the content, or because they don't need the content, or because it's not delivered in a particularly good way, or if we're delivering a lot of just-in-case training that never gets used, thinking about it from the learner's point of view, if we can be really, really focused and personalized and just in time when it's appropriate, we might deliver sort of 5 hours of learning content instead of 10 hours of learning content. And if that's relevant, and you've got 10,000 learners, that's 50,000 hours of saved time that you can give back to the learners, or that the learners can do something else with, maybe more learning, maybe contribute to the organization, whatever. So so the value part is part of it, but sometimes the things on the left can be very wasteful for the learners.
That's it. And Fernando, I hope that answered your question there on why collective learning would be on the left. This is about for example, one size fits all can be the right approach in some circumstances, but I think what we're suggesting is we need to rethink when we are using an approach without asking what the value of it is. And here are some examples where we often see that it's more likely that some of the things we've listed here on the right would add value, and reducing some of the things on the left would also gain value.
Yeah. Collective learning might add a huge amount of value, and you could easily flip some of these to be the other way around, of course. So if people are learning from each other, if people are learning by working through problems and solving the problems and making sense of the solutions, then collective learning is a very valuable activity and wouldn't be wasteful at all. But it's always interesting to kind of go, and the other thing that's interesting, it says theory is never wasteful, integrating theory and practice is desired. And Terence, I think I can see where you're coming from on that one, but I think in an organizational context, sometimes you can go an awfully long way in teaching people theory that they don't make use of. I think really, really strong practitioners will have a really strong underpinning theory that they're able to use to improve the way they put things into practice, or to be innovative or whatever. So I love the fact that people are coming up with things that are sort of the diametric opposite of what we're saying here. What we're trying to do here is be thought-provoking and go, if you're going to give people lots and lots and lots of theory that they can't make use of, that's a waste. If you can give them theory that they can use to leverage what they're doing, clearly it's not a waste. Couple of other examples here. There's some obvious things that came up on the Padlet actually. Things like not being able to travel. Travel time can be useful thinking time, but also it can waste a lot of time getting to places, staying in hotels. Whilst it might be enjoyable, whilst you might meet interesting people, it might be quite stimulating. In a learning context, technically that can be wasteful. So doing something where people need it can be less wasteful than doing something where people have to get to. And similarly, pushing stuff out to people might be very, very necessary in a compliance context. We might absolutely have to push content towards people, or there might be content that we want to push people because it makes them safe, or helps them understand new products or whatever. But pull learning that is, where learners are saying, I need this now, or I need this soon, or I need it because it's going to help me solve this problem, can be less wasteful than push learning. But you can see that you can see this is a controversial thing. So when we're putting stuff into the kind of, could this be wasteful? The answer is all the things on the left could be wasteful, but they could also be valuable. Some of the things on the right could be wasteful, but they could also be extremely valuable. You could argue, for example, generic versus bespoke. Bespoke is, the idea of bespoke is it's really tailored to an organization's need or an individual's need, and generic may be wasteful because it may not be utterly relevant, but it might be cheap. Generic might be good enough and it might be cheap. So, there's lots of different things to think about here.
There's also, there's a place here for, and these are really things to start a conversation and points of interest really to think about where the value is. For example, you were talking about travel then, Jeff, and I think what's been really interesting in this time is, we often use constraints as a design thinking approach. There absolutely is a place for travel and being on site, but also this has given us the opportunity to think through, how do we create a local context virtually? How do we bring people together, say in the same role, facing the same challenges the world over, across different sites, to share things with each other in a new way that we might not have been able to do beforehand. Equally, if you think of push versus pull, we're not saying that there's never a place for pushing learning, but I think what we're seeing is that actually the reality of the way that people learn, the thing that we hear a lot of is learning in the flow of work. Accessing things at the point of need is something that we see as generating a lot of value at the moment, and it's something that I think we need to think about when we're looking at and reevaluating the value of learning solutions and design.
So we've got a question here from Enid, and the difference between sort of teach versus learn, and I think that there's a number of different ways of looking at this, but I think one of the big differences from my point of view is that teaching is often, teaching and deciding what people need is often determined by the teacher, by the trainer, by the designer of the learning, and learning is something that's much more personal. It's what happens in somebody's head when they acquire new knowledge, new skills, new behaviors. So of course, the tighter those two are knitted together, and sometimes if somebody's learning about something new, how would they learn about something new unless somebody teaches it? But teach versus learn here means that the agenda, where it can be wasteful is when the agenda is set by the teacher without actually sufficiently exploring the needs and the requirements of the learner. And so what will often happen is that people will teach stuff that people already know, and learners then have to kind of move at the pace of the slowest person if they're in a group, for example. So just a couple of thoughts on that. I hope that helps, Enid. One of the things that you mentioned just now, Ella, that I think is fantastic is that we've got people on this call from Sao Paulo, we've got people from this call from Montego Bay, and actually getting questions from you guys and getting different perspectives on this sort of thing and bringing people together from all over the world is a great way of adding value. We've thrown a couple of slightly controversial ones in here, as this is designed to provoke thought, obviously, but we've had some fun debates. We've had some fun ideas. So you might say, well, why is media rich less wasteful than something that's lo-fi? If you're producing something like an animation, that's often quite an expensive thing to do. We'll come on to that in a moment, but a couple of other things on here. Learning that's unaccountable might be great learning, but if you can measure and rate and identify how much people think of it, or what impact it's had, or what difference it's made to people's acquisition of knowledge and skills, then even though the learning might be great, if you can check that it is, if you can prove that it is, then it's a great way of sort of making sure that you're not delivering things that people don't rate or don't like or don't need or don't make a difference. And somewhere versus anywhere, being able to learn when you've got the time to learn is obviously less wasteful than having to set aside specific time to learn. Being able to learn when you feel like learning is obviously less wasteful than learning when somebody is forcing you to learn. So there's a couple of things there. And the tutor-centric versus learner-centric thing, I think, comes back to Enid's point about, one of the ways of looking at the difference between teaching and learning.
Yeah, and one final thing I'd add on that is, and it kind of relevant to Enid's point, is in instructive versus insightful. I think often, if you look at kind of traditional pedagogy and learning approaches, is actually we think about structure and scaffolding, but a lot of what we know about good learning is it's about discovery and meaning making for the individual, and so there's so much that we can do in terms of supporting their understanding and their development, but actually it's in creating a space for people to learn and apply in their own context and in their own way that is really important, and where there is value.
And you can try to create good value learning from a provider's point of view, from a training team's point of view, from a trainer's point of view, from a supplier's point of view. And so you can do things that are cost effective, and you can do things that you believe will work, and so on and so forth. But if you really get it right from the learner point of view, there are normally far more learners than there are trainers. And so if you can really give a learner a fantastic experience in a short space of time, or over a period of time, then it's the hidden cost of waste, or the hidden benefit of value that can be a much greater consideration than the cost of creating content. I thought it's always worth referring to a couple of practical examples. So we just to throw something out there, really, we did a program for Royal Mail, which is the mail distribution one of the main ones in the UK, and they have a lot of yards around the country and a lot of big trucks driving around, and you don't really want a truck reversing into you or driving over your foot. So yard safety is something that's really important to them. And one of the features of their yards is that they have lots of different types of yards. There'll be some yards that hold 4 trucks. There's some yards like the picture on the screen that maybe hold sort of, dozens and dozens of trucks, maybe even hundreds of trucks. And so explaining yard safety in different contexts is difficult, and it's a subject that really lends itself to video. But they set us a challenge, actually. They said, how can we create videos that mean that we're not putting the video crews at risk, we're not putting them in danger of being run over, that illustrate the wide variety of yards that we have to support, but also are able to show things like, what happens when there are blind spots in vehicles and things like that. So we work with them to kind of work up a best value solution, and we came up with this idea of using yard plans and toy cars and existing footage and photography to tell stories about safety in different types of yards. And we did this a little while ago, and we're a bit ahead of the game here. So we were able to create a learning solution that used studio shots with toy vehicles, with engineering plans of yards or architectural plans of yards, and we also managed to do this keeping distance. So if you're in the UK, you'll recognize this sort of yellow and black symbol that sort of says make sure you're staying 2 meters apart. So that's an example of how using a rich media approach with a bit of creativity can actually deliver a lot more than you would be able to do through other means.
And we're going to have a quick look at another example of multimedia being, traditionally thought of as more expensive than other more lo-fi approaches, but really can be very cost effective, because in this example we used animation to show how circulation works and how the heart pumps blood around the body. This is something that can be used in a range of contexts and for many different audiences, and fundamentally what could take 20 minutes of discussion or more can be condensed into 1 to 2 minutes. Now, I'm not suggesting that more rich media or immersive technologies are always right. To the contrary, as Jeff alluded to earlier, lo-fi can be much more effective in certain contexts. For example, someone's suffering a heart attack, a simple checklist, to assess is obviously going to add much more value than something like an animation. But the point is that we need to think about where that value can be added by considering these factors. And actually, we decided not to include this, but one of the things that we advocate for doing is something that we call a diff analysis. So it's difficulty, importance, and frequency, and that kind of analysis can really help to identify where to invest time and effort. And if we combine that with design and thinking through what kinds of approaches will really make a difference, means we can come up with the most innovative solutions that target that investment and effort into the appropriate places.
There's a very interesting question that's popped up in the chat. So the diff analysis is a good way actually of addressing sort of value on different programs and different levels of complexity. But I think the second part of Enid's question relates to sort of topics that come with sort of challenging, deeply held personal beliefs, which are addressing things like sort of racism, oppression, and privilege. And those topics are quite challenging to navigate. And I think that they're also topics that very often require conversation, understanding, the telling of stories, the sharing of experiences, those sorts of things, and also calling out things that may be unacceptable. So one of the ways that you might add value in that area is to create a safe space to have those conversations, or a place where individual stories can be shared. So a couple of examples there might be a well-moderated discussion forum, perhaps an internal organizational discussion forum, or it might be something like when you're collecting the stories of people's lived experiences, that you have perhaps an area where people can go and look at videos of their stories. And a self-captured video can often be quite a cheap and effective learner-generated content, actually something we were going to mention, where if you want to leverage what you've got, learning from the learners. And these days, when everybody's got smartphones, giving them a task or an activity to be able to contribute to the learning is a great way of adding value at a relatively low cost, as long as you've got somewhere to put it, and as long as people can feel like in this sort of subject matter area, they're operating in a safe environment. I hope that helps. It's I mean, when you ask these questions, obviously we respond to the things that kind of immediately come to mind. And if you've got something else in mind, Enid, pop another question in the chat and we'll see if we can help in another way. Moving on a little bit, we're sort of just over halfway through the session. There's always a bit of a, as well as looking at, removing waste, as well as looking at examples of how you can be creative about adding value, as well as making sure you're focusing on the needs. There's also some things that you can consider, in particular around investing wisely. And actually, in answering Enid's question, you provided me with a perfect link. Thank you for that, Enid. There are things that we can do that can help you leverage your initial investment. So, for example, if you've set up a really great workshop, or a really great virtual classroom session, or a really great video, or a really great piece of digital learning, or a really great workbook, you can leverage those resources by doing more things with them. So things like, if you've got a technological environment where you can share learner-generated content, I'm a big fan of things like, let's talk about contemporary issues, and then let's set people an activity where they can go and explore those contemporary issues. So that might be an activity of putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and sort of researching perhaps where they get their source of information from. And then if you share that information, you generally will increase the knowledge of the group. So setting activities and assignments and sharing that as part of the learning experience can be both very insightful for the learner, very insightful for the collective group of people who are learning, including perhaps a tutor and a facilitator, and also allow the conversation to take place. So things like discussion forums, chat, sort of social sharing spaces that are visible to the group of learners, a good place to do that. Other things you can do is bottle the experience. So, we're bottling this webinar, we're recording it for playback. So people that want to look back at something we covered, maybe in 6 months' time, and they go, I think Jeff and Ella had something interesting to say there, they can go back and they can find the webinar without having to attend it again. And obviously, we can do things like provide transcripts of things like this. But also sometimes, you're lucky enough to get somebody, a real expert in the field, who you can sort of only perhaps get into the organization once. And if you can record the information that they're sharing again, and obviously seeking their permission to do that. That can be a great way of leveraging an investment of bringing somebody in who's got a great deal of expertise. Couple of things you can do around the tools as well. So if you are doing something like product training, where you might have a kind of standard structure, you might be covering benefits, features of a product. You might say a good way of teaching that is, once you come up with a really, really good format, is to reusing the format. Pour the creativity into the content on the page, but reuse the format so it's familiar to the learners and easy to build and update and so on. So there's a few ideas here about leveraging the initial investment. Another one is, our learning teams, will often know a huge amount about the organization and be very, very skilled at delivering certain types of learning. But as things are changing, they're kind of having to get to grips with different tools. They're trying to have to get to grips with kind of different skills requirements and, rapid change and so on. So developing the learning team and staying on top of that is a great way of continuing to invest in perhaps a very talented group of people.
And we're going to talk more about that in some subsequent webinars. But I'm just going to dig in quickly to one of the things that Jeff's mentioned. So, and I noticed, Fernando, you had a question or a comment, and I'm with you. There's huge value in social learning. Leo built one of the largest master's programs in Europe for the National Health Service in the UK. And one of the key features of this mostly digital blend was how we both enabled people to learn on the job and connect people to their work through the learning, but also connecting learners to support each other in tutor groups, actual learning groups, and in digital forums and various other ways. I think the point here is what you see if people can create their own content by sharing insight, by supporting each other at a point of need, and by learning from each other. We can even generate the capability to respond to unanticipated situations, novel situations that we can't train for, in inverted commas. This is important because what we call social learning is something that generates value over time, but it isn't traditionally thought of as it's an underlying investment, and it's the underlying thinking and design rather than providing learning programs and content. It's giving learners some of the work and asking them to create and generate and support and learn from each other, and then that can be applied in the workplace. And as Jeff said, it's bottling that expertise, and that's the thing I think that really yields value, and where we're seeing massive advances in technology that are enabling us to do that. And in this example, you can see that there was a huge impact on people's work, and in fact, the majority of people who took part in this program were promoted and related that to their learning experience. So it was making a huge difference in the way that they worked.
Yeah, got a couple of questions coming in related to this, actually, from Terence, who's asking what's an LXP, and from Richard, who's sort of saying how are forums moderated, and I can perhaps bring those two questions together. So once upon a time, there were things like sort of training administration systems that would book people on courses and send them their joining instructions and get them to go to the right hotel and things like that, and allocate them to the right groups. And then learning management systems came in, which sort of delivered e-learning and delivered assessments and captured learner records related to those. And as learning technologies has grown and developed, there's more and more things you can do, things like social learning, things like learner-generated content and sharing that, and learning experience platforms, which is what LXP stands for, is I suppose the next generation on from learning management systems, which are to give you a much broader set of learning techniques that you can bring together. So on a learning experience platform, you might do something like a piece of digital e-learning, you might watch a video, you might contribute to a discussion forum, but you also might be able to access curated content as well as created content. You might be able to set up playlists of things you want to study, or you might have a trainer set up a playlist of things you could study. It's kind of a learning management system plus, and contains a lot more features. And in terms of moderating it, I think the important thing is that you're in an organizational learning program, you're normally bringing together a group of learners who have a common interest. So in the example we've got on screen at the moment, that's an interest in managing healthcare. So you've already got a context for the moderation to take place. And so the moderation is not normally about controlling behavior. It's normally about creating conversations. It might be about sort of, guiding people in the right direction and saying, you're raising topics here that aren't really part of the curriculum. Or it might be about sort of guiding people if they're contributing ideas that are dangerous or out of date or whatever. But it's usually done effectively when it is about prompting discussion, guiding the learning, and really reinforcing the fact that this is a place to learn about something and not just a place to socialize.
One of the really interesting things, just to follow on from that, Jeff, that we've seen is you tend to see in established communities a high degree of self-moderation, and actually one of the really interesting things from an organizational perspective is often there is a fear around, what if there are recommendations or information that is wrong. Not only do we start to see that self-correct because we're lifting, almost surfacing where there are misunderstandings or where there is a need to develop further, but it enables that to be then targeted. So it's more of a reflection of conversations that are happening in the organisation than it is of the social learning in generating misunderstandings.
And I also think to the point earlier on about sort of subjects like, but where attitude and behaviour is really important, like sort of discrimination and this sort of thing, you can also see the conversations that aren't happening, and so you can sort of prompt to help make them happen as well as the conversations that are happening. I just wanted to shift the pace a little bit here and bring in another element of, how you can look at value, cost, and waste, and bringing a little bit of financial perspective on this. So, what this slide shows is the idea of as long as you're choosing the right learning approach, the fact that different learning approaches can have very different costs over time. So, any different solution that you put in, whether you're actually measuring the cost or not, it's a good idea to have an awareness of the cost. So different solutions have different fixed costs and different variable costs. And what I mean by that is that, if you're putting in something like a learning platform, it will normally have a fixed cost to put it in. If you're creating a video, it will normally have a fixed cost to create. And then different variable costs. So if you're running many sessions of something like a webinar or a classroom session, every time you run the session, it'll have a variable cost. It'll be the cost of putting it on. It'll be the cost of the learners attending it, and so on. And so what I want to do here was to say that, comparing, for example, a digital solution and a non-digital solution, digital solutions will tend to have higher fixed costs. So the orange line there is a relatively high cost of perhaps creating some digital content. But once the content's created and made visible and accessible to the learners, it's a fairly gradual increase in the line. You might have to register more learners to a platform to access it. You might have to sort of just, keep it maintained, but it's a gradual increase in the line. Whereas actually delivering something like a face-to-face solution can often start off as a much lower cost solution for a small number of learners, but the cost just keeps adding on each time you run it. So thinking about how long you're going to own something and how many people are going to go through it can help you make decisions around value in terms of the difference between cost and what you get back from it. And this is obviously based on a particular solution, so the numbers relate to that solution. But I've also put on there the idea that this particular piece of learning is going to be worth something to the organization. It might be that delivering this learning will keep costs managed, or it might be that delivering this learning will sell more cars or something like that. But I've given a nominal value here to say that everybody who goes through this training on average, it's worth £300 to them, or $300 or whatever the figure is. So the orange line there shows the fixed cost of a solution and the variable cost for a digital solution. The grey line shows the grey line shows the total cost of a face-to-face solution, and the blue line shows the sort of benefit you're getting back from those solutions. And of course, you need to train a certain number of learners for the cost of the learning to be overtaken by the benefits. this isn't, you know, completely straightforward, because sometimes it's quicker and cheaper to get something started face to face than it might be through digital. But if you look at this, if you look at this sort of, I've labeled a few points on the chart here, where you can see that there is a point at which one type of solution overtakes another type of solution in terms of its costs. So up to, on this example, 150 learners, it might be cheaper to deliver it face to face. Once you get over 150 learners for this example, it starts to become more expensive to do it face to face. There's also a point at which the benefits of the learning kick in. So in this example, the benefits of delivering the learning starts kicking around about 150 learners, whereas on the face-to-face example, it kicks in at more like sort of 250 learners. And if you carry on with this stuff long enough and deliver it long enough and the benefits are real, then you can also see that the return on investment is different for some solutions versus others. Now, the curve I've shown here shows that, you know, after a period of time, digital can become more cost effective, but that's not always the case. So, for example, if you've got a situation, you've always got to design a solution where the method matches the need, and sometimes digital just wrong for that, in the same way that sometimes other forms of solutions are just wrong. But if you are creating a content where the content's constantly, a solution where the content's constantly changing, or needs a lot of maintenance, or you know, it needs a lot of flexibility in terms of how it's delivered, or has particular accessibility requirements, that may mean it's not a good idea to think about something that's going to be in place for hundreds of learners, or you know, maybe for 5 years.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to sort of bring that up as a sort of an example of some of the things that's worth thinking about when you're deciding the length and numbers of people you're training.
Yeah, and you know, we're seeing some really interesting approaches that some organizations are taking, like the creation of digital twins for existing face-to-face courses. And I think, again, I just want to make the point that, you know, what Jeff's shown you is a tool. We're not making the point that any one particular format is better, but actually it's about evaluating based on the options and the situation and the context in which you're looking at, and thinking about things like lifetime cost, reusability and the sustainability.
Absolutely, and I think somebody's just put a question in there about sort of how live, and I presume this means live online learning compares to this. I mean, the big advantage of live online learning, apart from being able to reach around the world, is that, you know, you reduce some of the costs of sort of booking rooms, of travel and things like that. But if it's a live event, you've still got to have the trainer do it every time. So it would be a different cost curve, and it would probably be a lower, it would almost certainly be a lower cost curve, and deliver different benefits.
Yeah, we also see one-to-many, and there's a whole host of points around that.
We're as usual with this thing, when people ask a lot of questions, we're sort of, you know, we sort of start to become a little bit tight on time. One of the things we talked about at the start of the session was this idea of being able to deliver value by having an impact, and that's part of talking to stakeholders and understanding why it needs to be done. One of the things we're passionate about is actually trying to measure that impact, and I've just put up here a whole load of examples of measuring the impact on the business of learning, and they can be very different depending on the type of organization you're in. So, you know, one of our organizations we work with has been focusing particularly on shifting behavior, so that they've got alignment with their brand, so that they're delivering customer excitement and satisfaction. Another organization, which is much more kind of tangible in a way, I guess, is MedStar, and they are looking at how specific types of learning is generating higher recovery rates from cardio incidents. So that's a real life and death benefit. IHG, Intercontinental Hotels Group, they on their learning, their hotel managers program, they've identified that their hotel managers will generate a higher revenue per available room than people who haven't been for that program. So actually, in terms of not just focusing on value and concentrating on value, but demonstrating value, is a great way of explaining to the organization how the budgets that they're spending are actually delivering perhaps far greater results than the cost of those things. few other examples there. I won't go through all of those, but they're, you know, different sectors will have different ideas of what the impact means. And these are really important because a lot of organizations will look at things like uptake, completion, look at the sort of the questions that people are answering. That's what QLA stands for. Look at the knowledge acquired. But actually, if you can link back through the learner, a tangible impact on the organization based on the learning that they've done, that's really, really a good demonstration of value. And we use this particular model here. What we do is we say start with the business or the operational or the organizational goal that you're trying to achieve, track back through what people need to do to deliver that goal, track back through what people need to learn to you know, deliver that behavior, and obviously translate that into the training that you're delivering. But then if you go back the other way and say, did it make a difference? Did the people that complete this training learn the stuff? Did they put that into practice, and did that help them achieve the goal? And if you can track that on an individual basis, you can create a really strong chain of evidence, actually, that the learning that you're doing is making a difference. Not every form of learning supports this, you know, but you know, learning how to be a better manager, creating the chain of evidence to specific outcomes can be quite tough. But you know, there are many situations where this is a really good way of making sure that value is measured.
And I think you can use this on work that's in flight, and also as you're going in to design new programs. It's important to think about how you are going to demonstrate value and measure that real world impact. And just to say, you know, we've been looking at this for the last 5 years or so, and so we know that it's something that has proven challenging, but it really doesn't have to be. As just kind of shown, if you can demonstrate that chain, we can make it really simple and prove the delivery of value.
There's one more thing we wanted to cover. We've only got about 5 minutes left, but we also wanted to come back to this idea of the training team being fit for the future and being in a position to deliver value. And as they're having to get to grips, or we're all having to get to grips with new ways of delivering learning and different distributions of learners and so on, we thought we'd ask you another question, which was, what do you think the training team needs to be good at in order to be able to deliver value? And so I've got another Padlet here. It's a different one from the first one, and I'm just going to ask if you could contribute your ideas to this, so that again we can, you know, we can share knowledge and understanding of about, you know, what might make us fit for the future in terms of delivering value. And I can see that somebody's already in there in terms of flexibility, so we agree with that, yeah. By the way.
Definitely being flexible in how you deliver. I think L&D teams also needing to recognise what people will want and deliver well, adapting to change, exactly that.
So if there's any more questions, while people are putting those ideas up on the board, we'll keep an eye on those and try to respond to those. If there's any more questions you want to put into the thread, we will try to finish on time. And we're not far off finishing. We've only got another slide or two to go. But if you've got any more questions you want to put up, when we finish the session, what we'll do is we'll save the recording, we'll make it available to you, we'll share any insights that we think have come out of this session, and obviously, of course, thank you very much for attending. We'll stay on the session a little bit longer if there are questions that are coming in. But I think it's interesting to see that, you know, there is some, you know, we are hitting the mark with some of this, that you know, it is important to align with strategic imperatives and add to the bottom line. We'll come back to this deck. Come back to this just before we do. I'll flip back to the deck and just sort of cover sort of one other input really. And we think that the training team needs to be able to do a lot more stuff. We think they need to be able to create different types of content. We think they need to be able to measure the impact of learning. We think they need to be able to analyze and define solutions that are very focused on value. And it's something we're really keen to support. You know, if we can bring value to our clients' organizations or have the conversations that help you do the same, then
yeah. One of the reasons we wanted to talk about this today was, you know, we know that obviously lots of businesses are finding things challenging. You know, we're all looking at, you know, do we take things in-house? Are we outsourcing? How are we using our budgets most effectively? And actually, you know, this is an effort to think, how do we make sure that our organisation is fit for the future, and that we as learning and development professionals are fit to support that organisation of the future. So really asking those hard questions about where is it we're going and what do we need to be able to do to deliver that.
And just on a sort of a point to finish really, and then I'll go back to the Padlet. And if you have to leave, I hope this has been thought-provoking and useful, and thank you very much for joining. I thought it was also worth just thinking about what are the skills that we need to be supporting within organizations, within operations, within, you know, the people we work for, to be fit for the future. We've seen things come about. So we've seen attention on learning programs to make sure that people can be safe and secure when they're working from home, that they're adopting good cyber practices working from home, that, you know, when people are returning to the workplace, they're able to do so safely, and they're able to operate safely on customers' premises. So these are tactical things that are sort of responsive, that are coming back. People are responding to in very in a very kind of need-driven way. But I was just going to say, if I return to the Padlet, you know, if there's a particular needs that you think are going to be really, really important within your organizations, maybe we could add that to the Padlet as well. And you know, for the people that have to leave, thank you for joining. If you've got any further questions, we'll try to answer them for another 5 or 10 minutes.
And finally, I'm just going to share that the next couple of webinars that we'll be doing, we'll be looking at that in kind of more focus and more detail around the capability of teams, so both in terms of design and development. So do keep an eye out for the follow-on webinars if that's something that interests you. Beyond that, I'm going to say thank you to Jeff and to the rest of the Leo team, Lindsay and Hannah, who've been working behind the scenes. And thank you to you all for attending today's webinar on value-driven learning. If you've got any other questions, Jeff, I think if you nip back to the presentation deck, we can see you've got Jeff and my emails, or contact us at talktous@leolearning.com. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining us, and do enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you. We'll stay on just for a couple of minutes. We've got a question coming in from Fernando, which is, are personalized learning journeys, lifelong learning, picking up with their new tech? I think the answer is, you know, yes, if you've got an organization with loyal employees and you're able to sort of focus in on the requirements of particular groups of people or particular individuals. One of the things that learning technology is getting a lot better at, particularly things like actually learning experience platforms such as Degreed, is looking at what learners are looking at and suggesting other things they may find interesting. And also some of the learning technology platforms are also getting increasingly sophisticated about relating learning to competencies and capabilities. So in lifelong learning, obviously people want to develop competence and capabilities over time. So I think my answer is that the new tech is supporting a lot of those things. So thanks for the question, Fernando. And enjoy the rest of your day. As I say, we'll hang on just for a few more moments in case people want to sort of ask additional questions. But as before, thanks very much for joining us. As Ella said, for those of you who might still be here, the next couple of sessions are going to look at sort of capabilities of the learning team, and some of the things that are going up on the Padlet, we'll try to make sure we include within that session. So things like design thinking and moderating social and collaborative learning, and looking at ways of reformatting face-to-face to virtual training, obviously is a hot topic at the moment. So we'll try and pick these ones up in the next one.
Very good. These already on the list.
Yeah, So thanks again, everybody. There don't seem to be many more questions coming in, or if there are, I can't see them. And so I think at that point we'll probably close there and sign off. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everybody.